So the role in the ecosystem. Saprophagus insects are an important component of the food web, and they have specific jobs within an ecosystem. So an ecosystem, let's define these words. That is a biological community together with its physical environment or the habitat, which functions as a unit to capture and cycle energy, and which does this more or less independently of other ecosystems. So it's a functional unit. Its physical environment, the entire biological community that then captures and cycles energy. And it doesn't need other ecosystems to really make this work. It can be a closed system. So when you think of ecosystems, you think of things like riparian, so around water, around lakes and streams, or mountain, or oceans, or deserts, tundra, forests, tropicals. Those are the types of ecosystems you think of. When you think of, say, a tropical ecosystem, it doesn't matter if there's going to be a desert a world away or not necessarily. Okay, that ecosystem will function with all of its biological components and cycle energy within that ecosystem. Now, an environment as part of the ecosystem is defined as the total of circumstances surrounding an organism or group of organisms, especially the combination of external or extrinsic physical conditions that affect and influence the growth, development, and survival of organisms. So it is the total of the circumstances surrounding the organism, all of those physical factors that will affect growth, development, and survival of organisms within an ecosystem. So this includes abiotic things such as weather, sunlight, soil, all of that sort of stuff that can affect the survival of an insect. It also includes biological things or biotic things like plants, animals, other insects, predators, parasites, all of the food, all of that sort of stuff. So that's the environment part. So we've got this ecosystem and environment. Now the food web. So you guys are mostly vets, mostly scientists of some sort. So you have probably done a lot of work with the food web. When I teach some of my lower level courses, people who have only gotten, a biology in high school or something like that, I have to spend a lot of time here on the food web because most classes, most lower division classes still teach the food chain. And I still get a lot of people going, well, aren't we higher than these other animals? And it takes a little while for them to understand the idea that we're not just a single chain. It doesn't go directly from producers to, herbivores to carnivores to, anything like that. And we'll talk about those different trophic levels in a minute. But it doesn't just go up in a chain and then it reaches humans and we're the highest and we win. It doesn't quite work like that. It's more of a web. So we're just going to do a quick review of the idea of the food web here. I just won't go into it in huge depth like I do with some of my other classes. So the food web describes the interaction between organisms in an ecosystem. And it describes this interaction between organisms and their job in recycling nutrients back into the environment. So I like to think of it as just sort of this big machine that just is constantly recycling energy. It's going from one place to another, and the animals have this job, or plants or whatever, have this quote-unquote job of taking that energy and moving it along. So we organize all of these organisms by trophic levels. So the term trophic, just a reminder, has to do with the process of nutrition. A trophic level is the position of an organism within a food web. So we talk about a trophic level, and it's just where is that organism in that food web, and what does it do to recycle energy? So the first trophic level, quote-unquote first trophic level in the food web consists of producers. So these are organisms that transform light energy into chemical energy. So basically they turn sunlight into sugar. So think way back to your basic biology, your basic botany, and remember about photosynthesis. It is taking that light energy from the sun and turning it into the goodness of carbohydrates. Oh man. And I bet those of you who especially are doctors or vets or have your higher education, you had to spend a lot of time memorizing the photosynthesis processes. just because it is such an important aspect of this whole living world. So they're called producers because they produce large amounts of biomass relatively quickly. They can grow very, very fast just using sunlight and carbon dioxide. And it includes all of the plants. Okay, plants are producers. Now, those organisms that eat the producers are called the primary consumers. These include herbivores and really anything that eats plants, from mammals to birds to insects to fish. Okay? So anything that eats a plant is called a primary consumer. Then from there, it goes up to secondary consumers. So secondary consumers generally eat meat, and they generally prey on the herbivores. So this is where that idea of food chain came from. You start with the producers, that's the bottom of the chain, and then the herbivores eat the producers, and the primary consumers eat the secondary consumers, the predators eat the herbivores, and it goes up from there. However, if you think about what makes up a primary consumer versus a secondary consumer, you can see that there's all these different links in there. So it goes up from secondary consumer to tertiary consumers to quaternary consumers. Tertiary consumers are those that prey on the secondary consumers. Quaternary consumers prey on the tertiary, etc. However, once we get to these higher trophic levels, it's not very stable. You do not find exclusive tertiary or quaternary consumers. You don't ever find, say, an animal that only feeds on tigers. So tigers only feed on, let's pretend this is how it really works in the world. Tigers only feed on, say, antelope. And then you will find a predator that only feeds on tigers. You don't see that. What you will see is sort of general consumers who will feed on antelope and tigers and dead other things. And you just on and on, like they'll pretty much feed on whatever they can get their little teeth on. So this is when we got the idea of, well, maybe it's not a chain, it's a web. And then you have your omnivores. So omnivores are those organisms that will eat both plants and flesh. So there are a lot of animals are omnivores. Humans are omnivores. Bears and fish and insects, all manner of animals will eat other things, not exclusively just flesh or just plants. And really, when you think of an ecological system, it makes sense to be an omnivore. That's a lot of different options you have for food. If you think about humans, we have a lot of options for food. We can eat a lot of different things. All right. Now, other organisms within this food web. Parasites. Now, I mentioned above that parasites will feed on living things, and they don't tend to consume that entire living organism. And for most of the time, they leave that organism alive after they finish. So, they don't kill the organism, I want to mention this, unless they happen in very high numbers. So it is possible for even those parasites that normally don't kill an animal, say ticks, they can completely kill that organism if they show up in the thousands. It can happen, but that's not very common. And if you think about it, that makes sense. A parasite that kills its host is killing itself, especially if that parasite has not finished its feeding cycle or its living cycle. So there are a lot of parasites that have evolved with their hosts, and they've evolved in such a way that they just, take a little bit of the energy from the host. They don't completely kill that host. So they don't kill, quote unquote, the hand that feeds it, which just makes a lot of sense. All right. So they don't kill their hosts unless they get very large numbers or that host gets a secondary infection. This is the downside of parasites, or one of the many downsides of parasites. If there is a secondary infection, like in the case of ticks, they can spread disease. They can vector disease, and that can kill the host. Now, parasites can be all type of animals or organisms, from animals and insects to plants and amoeba, bacteria, all manner of stuff. So parasites are kind of all over the place. They don't kill the host for the most part. Now, finally, the transformers. Hello, transformers. These are the organisms that are responsible for taking dead organisms, dead animals and plants and things, and recycling their bound up nutrients back to the environment. So if you think about all these trophic levels, each organism at some point will die. Some point for some reason. If it's eaten, the predator will use up what nutrients it can and then get rid of those waste products in the form of feces and urine or expelled as carbon dioxide. If the organism just dies, its body will lie there, keeping all of those nutrients it used to form itself bound up until something frees them up. So that's why this trophic level is called the transformers. They can take the dead bodies of plants or animals or insects or expelled waste material and free up those nutrients, turning them into tissue. Bacteria and arthropods are the major transformers. And there are some scavengers, like mammals and birds. So here we've got a vulture that happily feeds on dead organisms. Right? They are transforming those otherwise bound up nutrients into free energy or into tissue, into more of themselves. Okay? So the transformers, often called the decomposers, this is the trophic level that is responsible for cleaning up the world. And when people talk about like, ew, why do you deal with animals? Why do you deal with dead animals or insects on animals? And how can you think that is neat? I like to tell them, come on now, they're the garbage men of our world. They take care of us. They're the reason we are not knee deep in dead bodies all of the time. They clean up after us. And how awesome is that? Yay! All right. So that's the basic idea of food webs and trophic levels. If you have any questions, just go ahead and ask.